What if the most beautiful, perplexing woman in one of Bob Dylan's greatest songs was right in front of us the whole time? Visions of Johanna has baffled fans for decades, but what if all the clues point to a single, iconic muse? We're cracking the code today. Forget everything you thought you knew about Visions of Johanna. For years, speculation has run wild, but today we're unveiling a compelling argument backed by historical context and lyrical deep dives. Could Joan Baez be the elusive Madonna in the flesh and bone? She's been called the muse of the pale light, but who is Johanna? Bob Dylan's Visions of Johanna is a lyrical labyrinth, but what if the path leads directly to one of the most famous figures of the 1960s? Prepare to see this masterpiece in a completely new light. Visions of Johanna isn't just a song, it's a state of mind. It feels like wandering through a sleepless night in New York City. 3 a.m, the heater's broken, the lights are dim, and outside, the city breathes in its own strange rhythm. Dylan's voice sounds half awake, half haunted. The music drifts like cigarette smoke, slow, weary, and restless. Every instrument sounds like it's been awake for days. And then Dylan begins. Ain't it just like the night to play tricks when you're trying to be so quiet? That opening line sets the tone for everything that follows, a song about confusion, beauty, and longing that refuses to rest. Dylan was only 24 when he wrote it, at the height of his fame, but on the edge of collapse. He was burned out, exhausted by touring, and suffocating under the weight of expectation. And around him, 2 women shaped his emotional world. Suze Rotolo, the girlfriend from his early Greenwich Village days, and Joan Baez, the folk music queen who'd once stood beside him on stage and in love. If Visions of Johanna is haunted by anyone, it might be her. In the song, Dylan paints 2 women, Louise and Johanna. Louise is there, holding a handful of rain, whispering to the narrator in a half-lit room. She's real, tangible, maybe even comforting. But Johanna isn't there at all. Her absence fills the entire song. Dylan sings, Louise, she's all right. She's just near. She's delicate and seems like the mirror, but she just makes it all too concise and too clear that Johanna's not here. Louise is the present. Johanna is the ghost. Now think about Dylan's life at that time. In 1965 and 1966, he was living with Sara Lownds, soon to be his wife, a woman who grounded him, much like Louise grounds the narrator. But there was still another presence haunting his thoughts, Joan Baez, the woman who had helped turn him from an unknown poet into a legend. Their love had burned brightly and ended in heartbreak. Baez had introduced him to her audiences, championed his songs, shared her stage. And then, just as fame exploded around him, Dylan turned away. He went electric, dove into surreal poetry, and left the folk purity behind. Baez was hurt. She'd stood by him at his most obscure, and now he'd left her behind in the folk world she helped build. Yet maybe, in those sleepless New York nights when Dylan wrote Visions of Johanna, her ghost still lingered, not as the woman in his arms, but as the muse who slipped away. The idea that Johanna could be Joan Baez isn't new, but it's often dismissed as too convenient. After all, Dylan's songs are full of abstraction and dream logic, not diary entries. Still, the evidence is intriguing, not as gossip, but as a dialogue between poetry and history. Consider the names themselves. Johanna and Joan share a common linguistic root, both derived from Yohanan, meaning God is gracious. Maybe coincidence, maybe wordplay, but Dylan was a master of double meanings and mythic connections. Then there's the timing. Dylan wrote Visions of Johanna in late 1965, not long after his romantic and artistic split from Baez. He was in transition, creatively restless, emotionally adrift, and suddenly alienated from the very folk scene that had nurtured him. Baez later admitted she was deeply wounded by how cold he became, describing him as brilliant, but impossible to reach. When you look through that lens, the song reads almost like an apology that never reached its destination. Take this line, for example. Inside the museums, infinity goes up on trial. It's one of the most quoted lines in Dylan's entire career and one of the most cryptic. But what if it's really about him? What if Dylan felt like an exhibit himself, trapped behind the glass of fame, his art under constant scrutiny? And what if Johanna, or Joan, symbolized the lost purity of his purpose, the honesty he left behind in the rush toward immortality? Then Visions of Johanna becomes more than a love song. It becomes a confession, an artist mourning the version of himself that fame devoured. There's a story about the night he wrote it. It was November 1965. Dylan was in the Chelsea Hotel in New York, that bohemian fortress of poets and painters and ghosts. He stayed up all night, pacing the floor, scribbling verses and muttering melodies to himself. His bandmates said he looked possessed, chasing a sound no one else could hear. He kept strumming the song until sunrise. When he finally recorded it months later in Nashville, his producer, Bob Johnston, told the musicians to keep it slow, like a song that's been awake all night. That's exactly what they captured, a melody that sways between exhaustion and revelation, half dream, half confession. Then there are the lyrics themselves, the lines that make the Baez connection hard to ignore. The ghost of Lectricity howls in the bones of her face. It's one of Dylan's most haunting phrases and maybe one of the most personal. Joan Baez was often described as luminous, ethereal, almost holy. Critics called her the Madonna of the folk movement. She had a face that looked carved from light, delicate, pale, expressive. The ghost of Electricity could easily refer to the electric revolution that separated them, the sound that changed everything. In that one image, Dylan could be confronting his own betrayal, seeing Baez through the electric glare of the world that had driven them apart. And then comes that chilling line, the Madonna she still has not showed. During the early 60s, Baez was literally called the Madonna by journalists who saw her as the pure, saintly embodiment of folk idealism. So when Dylan laments that the Madonna has not showed, it's hard not to hear regret, a longing for the moral and emotional clarity that she once represented. Whether intentional or subconscious, that reference ties Joan Baez and Johanna together in a way too poetic to be dismissed as coincidence. But Visions of Johanna isn't just a song about one woman. It's about the conflict between two worlds, the real and the ideal. Louise and Johanna are more than women. They are archetypes. Louise, like Sara in Dylan's life, represents the tangible, the safe, the domestic. She's there, she's dependable, but she's also limited. She just makes it all too concise and too clear. Johanna, on the other hand, represents transcendence, the muse, the ideal, the thing that burns too bright to last. The song lives in the space between them, between flesh and vision. Every verse in Visions of Johanna feels like a different dreamscape. A night watchman mutters to himself, the heat pipes cough, the country music station plays faintly from another room. A handful of rain, a mule's headlamps, infinity on trial, these are fragments of a surrealist painting. But underneath the chaos there's a pattern, a man torn between love and longing, reality and imagination. The world of the song is restless, fragile, and profoundly lonely. Dylan ends the song with the devastating line, "These visions of Johanna have now taken my place." It's the sound of surrender, the artist admitting that his obsession, his visions, his muse have consumed him completely. It's no longer about who Johanna is, it's about what she's done to him. He's become a ghost in his own life, replaced by the visions he cannot escape. And what about Joan Baez herself? She never claimed the song was about her, though she likely suspected it. Their history was too deep, their parting too painful for her not to feel echoes of herself in those lyrics. In later interviews, Baez spoke of Dylan with a strange mixture of affection and melancholy. She described loving him as like chasing smoke. She also wrote her own musical reply years later, Diamonds and Rust, a song dripping with bittersweet memory. Most listeners believe it's about Dylan. If Visions of Johanna was Dylan's ghostly farewell, then Diamonds and Rust was Baez's response. An equally poetic acknowledgement of love, loss, and time's cruel distance. But maybe it's unfair to say Visions of Johanna is about anyone at all. Dylan's genius lies in how he transforms personal feelings into something universal. Even if Joan Baez inspired it, the song escapes autobiography and becomes a meditation on longing itself, on the ache of knowing that some things, some people, and some moments can never be recaptured. Johanna isn't just a woman. She's the symbol of what we all lose: innocence, passion, inspiration, the fire that once made everything glow. Dylan himself once said his songs were pictures and visions. Visions of Johanna feels exactly like that, a painting made of words, colors swirling in darkness, never quite resolving into a clear image. Every time you listen, you see something new. Johanna could be art. She could be truth. She could be faith, or freedom, or the ghost of youth itself. The song refuses to decide, and that's why it endures. Of course, Dylan never explained the song. When interviewers asked what it meant, he brushed them off, saying it was about all kinds of things. Maybe that's the only honest answer. Some art isn't meant to be explained, it's meant to be felt. Over the years, Visions of Johanna has been called the crown jewel of Blonde on Blonde, Dylan's most poetic, most mysterious, and perhaps most beautiful song. Critics compare it to T.S. Eliot, to Rimbaud, to surrealist cinema. But maybe it's simply Dylan himself, alone in a New York hotel room, staring into the early morning, trying to trap a dream before it disappears. So who is Johanna? Maybe she's Joan Baez, the folk Madonna, the muse of a bygone world. Maybe she's art itself, beauty always just beyond reach. Or maybe she's the embodiment of everything Dylan lost as he climbed higher into fame. That haunting feeling that something pure slipped through his fingers. Whatever the answer, Visions of Johanna remains one of the most intimate mysteries in music history. Because in the end, the song doesn't offer solutions. It offers visions. Fleeting, ghostly, shimmering visions that hover somewhere between love and memory, between night and dawn. And maybe that's the truest reflection of life itself. We never really hold what we long for. We just see its light, flickering from across the room, calling to us like Johanna's pale face in the dark.